been doing on First Timothy, and then we'll get into Second Timothy after this. So I'm going to read through our passage, and instead of passing the mic around to everybody, I'll just read through it. You guys can listen and read it off of the screen. But this lesson is called It's All About the Benjamins. So we don't usually do this many money topics, but we just go with what the passage is talking about. So this is another one where Paul is talking to Timothy about our finances. So he says, all slaves should show full respect for their masters so they will not bring shame on the name of God and his teaching. If the masters are believers, that is no excuse for being disrespectful. Those slaves should work all the harder because their efforts are helping other believers who are well loved. Teach these things, Timothy, and encourage everybody to obey them. Some people may contradict our teaching, but these are the wholesome teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. These teachings promote a godly life. Anyone who teaches something different is arrogant and lacks understanding. Such a person has an unhealthy desire to quibble over the meaning of words. This stirs up arguments ending in jealousy, division, slander, and evil suspicions. These people always cause trouble. Their minds are corrupt and they've turned their backs on the truth. To them, a show of godliness is just a way to become wealthy. Yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. After all, we brought nothing with us when we came into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. So if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content. But people who long to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and some people craving money have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. 10 years ago, Elizabeth Holmes was one of the wealthiest, most respected people in the world at the incredibly young age of 30 years old. Today, she is broke, serving an 11-year prison sentence, and was named one of the world's 19 most disappointing leaders by Forbes magazine. What happened? Well, Elizabeth came from a family that had a history of influence and wealth. Her great-great-great-great-grandpop was Charles Louis Fleischmann, who created America's first commercially produced yeast in the 1860s. Doesn't sound like that big of a deal, right? Yeast? Okay. But he revolutionized baking in a way that made today's mass bread production possible, right? He's the guy responsible for all of the Tyndall's bread that comes all the time, right? And that everybody takes home with them. He made that possible. So the Holmes family was very proud of its yeast empire, according to a family friend. The family friend said, I think the parents very much yearned for the days of old when the family was one of the richest in America. And I think Elizabeth channeled that and at a young age. Elizabeth desperately wanted to be rich and influential like her great-great-great-grandpop. In college, she came up with an idea to do blood testing with a really small amount of blood from a finger prick instead of drawing blood from a needle, sort of like what you would do in testing for sugars, diabetes. Yeah, right? She wanted to do that, but with all blood testing. Blood testing that when you go to the doctor and they take blood from you, they draw like, a couple vials of blood. She wanted to do it from just a finger prick, right? And the reason that she came up with this idea is because as a kid, she was afraid of needles. But multiple experts in the field told her that this was not possible, right? You can test your blood sugar with a tiny little amount of blood, but you can't test for all the other things with that little blood. Well, that didn't stop Elizabeth. At 19 years old, she started a company called Theranos, which sort of sounds like an evil company, right? If you're a Marvel fan, it does, right? So I don't know if you invest in a company named Theranos, all right? But she made this company, and she claimed that she had developed this technology. Now, sadly, she was lying, and she was actually using normal blood testing methods and just claiming that it was her pinprick technology. But because she's a really smooth talker, she was able to recruit super influential people to come to her team and grow the company. The major investors in her company included Rupert Murdoch, who owned Fox News, the Walton family, who own Walmart and are the richest family in the world, and Carlos Slim, who at one point was the richest guy in the world. Each of these people lost hundreds of millions of dollars when the company collapsed. In 2015, Forbes named Elizabeth the youngest and wealthiest self-made female billionaire in the United States. She was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people and ranked number 73 in Forbes' 2015 list of the world's most powerful women. She had everything going for her until the authorities discovered that it was all fake. In 2022, she was convicted of defrauding investors and sentenced to 11 years in prison and $452 million in restitution that she had to pay. Her kids are 2 and 4 years old, and she is totally gonna miss the most important years of her kids' lives. Why? Because she was consumed with power and with greed. It's unfortunate that Elizabeth didn't have anyone to teach her the lesson that Paul is trying to teach us in this chapter today, to pursue godliness instead of wealth, and to be content with what we have. Here's my question for you guys to answer with your groups. If you don't have one, find a little group that you can talk with. Here's the question. Question is it wrong to make wise financial investments and save for the future? Go ahead and share your answer. And you can answer that with one word and then answer why. Why? All right. So let's go back here to the chapter in verse 1. Paul says, all slaves should show full respect for their masters, so they will not bring shame on the name of God and his teaching. You might wonder why teaching on money starts with instructions to slaves. That's a little bit weird, right? Because obviously slaves have no money. So why did Paul put these two topics together? Well, first we need to understand that first century slavery is not the same thing as what we are familiar with today. Plug it into that computer there. So it's not the same thing that we're familiar with. Generally, people in the first century were not enslaved because of their ethnicity, their language, or their culture. Usually they sold themselves into slavery in order to repay debts. They weren't segregated from society. They were usually paid similar wages as somebody who was free. They could also work their way out of slavery. Very few slaves were slaves for life in that culture. So in the first century, this was nothing like the African slave trade. In the system of Paul's day, only the person's work or their productivity was the property of the master, not the person themselves. One last thing about it is that the African slave trade was perpetuated by kidnapping and shipping people off to a foreign land. And the Bible unequivocally condemns kidnapping. It actually says this in Exodus 21. In this verse, it says, kidnappers must be put to death, whether they are caught in possession of their victims or have already sold them as slaves. So the whole idea of modern day slavery, that is completely outlawed in the Bible. And so early Christians, they did not start a movement to abolish slavery. I want you to think about that. It's really interesting. Right? They didn't get together. Paul didn't instruct them, hey guys, we're going to petition to get rid of slavery. Right? But later, Christians did do that when they encountered the modern practice of selling people based on their ethnicity. So guys, a lot of times Christians sort of like, don't know how to answer people when it comes to these passages, because like atheists will read this stuff and they will criticize us. Like you could go to, thousands of different websites and you will find people who are slamming Christians because there's verses like these verses here, right? But we don't need to shy away or be embarrassed about any of this, guys, because, it wasn't the same thing. And on top of that, it was our people. It was Christians who are the ones to lead the charge to eradicate the African slave trade. And it's Christians today that are still the ones leading the movement to end human trafficking. Guys, it's not atheists that do that. Right? Atheists don't do those sorts of things. It's followers of Jesus. I'm not saying that there aren't ever any single atheists that help, right? But for the most part, it's followers of Jesus that do those things and make a difference in the world. But in our passage, Paul doesn't teach about ending slavery at all, because this was different. In fact, he tells Christian slaves to respect their masters and to work hard. So these slaves are generally people who got themselves into financial trouble and needed to work their way out of that trouble. And that's why Paul throws these two verses about slavery into a section about money, because generally speaking, these slaves in the first century had made bad financial decisions, possibly because of wanting to get rich quick, maybe avoiding obligations or refusing to work hard. That's more of the context of the chapter. So in verse 5, Paul talks about the schemers who were headed down a similar path. He said, to them, a show of godliness is just a way to become wealthy. Don't use godly living as a means of wealth creation. Don't try to manipulate God to get what you want. Right? I am guilty of this when I was younger. God, I'll do this if you do that. Right? That whole idea comes from the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel movement. Guys, we don't serve God to get him to grant our wishes. We don't say, all right, I'm going to do this, God. I just need you to, Right? We serve God because he's already worthy. He's already done so much more than we could ever deserve. Guys, we only deserve judgment, and instead, he pours out blessing in our lives. So be thankful instead of looking for that next shopping spree. And don't take advantage of people either, right? Be careful about that. That's what these schemers were doing that Paul is talking about. They were taking advantage of people. Don't take advantage of people. Don't use Christian community as just a way to line your pocket. It's okay to get help from Christian brothers and sisters, but that shouldn't be the goal of Christian community. That should be a side benefit of being friends and connecting with a Christian family. We should focus way more of our time and energy on godliness than on wealth. And Paul said, true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. Be content with what you have instead of constantly running after more and more and more. There's a 5-minute video with the simple title, More, that I want to show you because I think it's amazingly accurate in its portrayal of the emptiness that we feel when we pursue stuff instead of pursuing God. So hopefully we got sound for this. Let's see. All right, go one more. So simple little video. What was the major problem for the inventor in the beginning of the video?
To accomplish whatever he was trying to accomplish, but I don't have any idea what that was.
Okay, to accomplish something. James?
I think he was relying on what he had there rather than relying on God.
Okay, relying on his own ingenuity. Brian?
He had no joy.
Okay, he had no joy, right? His world was an endless cycle of meaninglessness, right? Like, think of, they use that visual of the merry-go-round, right? Like, when you think about it, what is so merry about a merry-go-round? About going in a circle over and over and over. Like, a merry-go-round is fun for a tiny little bit, but the longer and the faster you go, the more sick you get. And our lives are like that merry-go-round, right? Meaningless. We go to school to get a good job, to make money, to buy things that will make us happy. And when that doesn't work, then we need more schooling or more ideas so we can get a better job or a better product, so we can make more money, so we can buy things that we think are going to make us happy, and on and on and on it goes, right? In the beginning, you saw that light coming from within the inventor. What was that light supposed to represent, do you think? Happiness. Okay, peace. Joy. Now remember, he wasn't happy in the beginning. Right? So he didn't have peace and he didn't have joy, but he had that light. What do you think it could have been? Okay, a fire that drives you. Yeah. What do you think, Haley? Hope. I think you got it, right? Putting those together, I think hope was the big one. It represented his hope in something better. He had that spark within him because he had hope that something out there would bring true happiness. Now, he didn't have true happiness. The light was not happiness because he was miserable. But at least he had the hope that it was out there somewhere, that if he just worked hard enough, that he could get there, that he could achieve it. What did he think would bring that happiness? Success. Yep. The money, the wealth, the influence. Yep. Fame, fortune. He thought all of those things would bring the happiness that he was looking for. But what happened when all of his dreams came true? He wasn't happy at all. Did you notice at the end that the spark was gone? Right? The spark was gone because he had no hope any longer. All of his dreams had come true, but they didn't bring the happiness that he thought they would. His dreams coming true were just like the bliss glasses that he invented. They didn't really change reality, they just masked reality. It was a temporary, false sense of happiness. And that's what Paul says is going on when we elevate wealth in our lives. In verse 9 he said, "But people who long to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction." Chasing riches is the very thing that will ruin your life. Just like the inventor, we were all created with a God-shaped hole in our lives that only God can fill. And we try to put other things in there all the time, especially money. It's probably one of the biggest ones, and it just never works. Doesn't work. You guys have probably seen one of these little kids' toys, right? Shape sorter. And the kids will open it up and they'll take the shapes out. Of course, dads can't figure it out. There we go. Right, my kids used to play with this when they were little, and this little thing infuriated me, right? Because I'm watching my kids, and they're always trying to shove the wrong piece in the wrong hole, and it only fits in one, right? And most of us do the same exact thing with our lives, right? We're constantly trying to shove other things into a hole that doesn't fit, right? Doesn't work. We think that other things can fill that hole in our lives. We think money and pleasure and drinking and drugs and partying and friends and success and relationships. We think that those things can fill it, but none of those pieces fit the hole, right? And it must just frustrate God to no end, to look down and to see of all of us who probably, everybody should sort of know better at this point, but we don't. And we're constantly trying to jam pieces into the holes that it doesn't fit, right? The problem is that the hole is a God-shaped hole. Paul says that godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. We need to be content. We need to be content with what we've been given, right? A relationship with Jesus is all that we need, even if we don't have material wealth. And if you really think about it, we do have all of that. We just think that we don't. We are already blessed beyond belief financially, guys. I know that you don't think that you have enough, right? You think all the time, I need more. We constantly think that way. But the reality is that we are the richest people to have ever walked this planet. Even our poor in this country are rich compared to 99% of those who have ever lived. If your family is so poor that you qualify for the top 4 welfare benefits, Social Security, disability, Section 8 housing, Medicaid, and food stamps, just those 4, together they are valued at about $35,000 a year. If you are so poor in this country that you qualify for those 4 benefits, you are among the wealthiest 1% of people that have ever lived on this planet. So if you're the poorest of the poor in the United States, you are the richest of the rich in the rest of the world. Every single one of us already has far more than what we need. And we need to stop focusing on all the stuff that we don't have and be content with what we do. Now, it doesn't mean that it's wrong to have money. It's not wrong. Paul's not saying that, because people misunderstand this, because this is one of the top 10 misquoted verses in all of the Bible. It says, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. How do people misquote it, Amanda? Yeah, that's what they say. They say money is the root of all evil. But that's not what it says. It says the love of money, right? That is the root of all kinds of evil. So guys, there is nothing wrong with having money. There were many wealthy people, wealthy, godly people in the Bible that God blessed financially. Wealth in and of itself is neutral. It's not good, it's not bad. It's what you do with it and how you treat it that matters. Do you own it, or does it own you? So it is perfectly legit to ask God to protect you financially if your heart is in the right place, right? I ask God that He would provide for my family, that we can continue to be a blessing to this ministry here and other ministries we support. We want to be able to have that, and to have what our family needs to thrive and to help other people. And I believe that God has done that for our family in very specific ways. One time, I feel God sent me a prophetic dream to warn me about not making a dumb decision. And that wasn't too long ago that He did that. I think it was His hand of protection against a potentially foolish financial decision that I was ready to make. And so I'll tell you about that dream. I, at that time, had a little bit of money that I wanted to invest, and someone was going to invest it for me. Somebody was going to do some day trading. You don't need to know what day trading is. By the way, you don't ever have to ring the bell here. Just walk in the door, all right? So you don't need to know what that is. You just need to know that it's a high-risk strategy that involves rapid decision-making, constant market monitoring, and exposure to potentially significant losses. That's Google AI that said that, all right? So I didn't really know any of that stuff, but I do have a cousin who tried to do this a few years ago. He tried doing day trading, and he ended up losing everything, losing his business even. And so the night before I was about to turn over the account to the broker, I had a dream. And in this dream, I was in my house, although this house did not look familiar to me, yet I knew in the dream that it was my house. And I was in the basement of the house where I had an elaborate setup, a computer station where I was doing day trading myself. And I was waiting for a particular stock to cross a certain threshold before I was going to sell it. And all of a sudden, a huge, almost hurricane-like storm began to roll into the area. And it was flooding so bad that water was pouring into the basement where I was working. Water was coming right down the basement stairs, and it was filling up the room, the basement where I was working. But I couldn't leave because I was waiting for the right moment to sell a stock. And I ran up the stairs to see why the water was pouring down the steps. And when I got up to the top of the stairs, I noticed that somebody had left the door wide open, which happens a lot at the Heim household. And water was just flowing right into the kitchen and down the basement stairs. And so I closed the kitchen door, and that slowed it down a little bit. But back in the basement, the water was still rising. It was still getting in. And so I picked up my computer and I held it in my arms as the water kept rising and rising. And I was trying to just keep it away from the water, because as soon as I pushed the button to make the trade, I was going to take the computer, unplug it, and run out of the house. And just as the water was about to overtake me, I woke up from the dream. I told Leah about the dream the next morning, and Leah said immediately that this was a warning from God, that we shouldn't continue our investment plan. Well, I didn't get it. All right, I had a whole conversation. I didn't get it because the warning didn't make sense, because we were only investing a little bit of money. Like, if we lost it all, it would stink, but it wouldn't kill us, right? This was extra money that I had saved to invest. But when I did more research into it, like, why would God warn me about this? So I did some research, and I found out that this method of investing has the potential to lose way more money than your initial investment. I thought I could only lose what I put into it, but that's not how it works. In fact, it's possible in this investing to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars if it all goes wrong. No matter how small your initial investment is, you could invest $100 and lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I feel like God gave me that dream to protect my family from a devastating financial mistake, because I didn't understand that. I didn't know any of that, right? There is nothing wrong with asking God to give you financial wisdom, as long as you keep wealth where it belongs, as a servant instead of a master. In Matthew 6:24, Jesus said, "No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Guys, all the stuff that we have in life is junk compared to the kingdom of God. So how do you fill that hole in your life? Well, Jesus, in that same passage in Matthew 6, goes on to tell us how you fill that hole. It says, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And then listen to this. He says, and all these things will be given to you as well. That's an amazing verse, guys. All the things that we are hoping for, when we seek his kingdom first, he gives us all that stuff. Now you're like, Jason, really? Like he just gives us everything if we put his kingdom first? You see, when we put his kingdom first, our priorities change. Our desires change. So the answer is yes. He gives us our desires because our desires have changed to kingdom desires. Right? It's the greatest plan ever. Guys, learn from the mistake of Elizabeth Holmes. Because wealth becomes, when it becomes an idol, that leads to our downfall. The last verse in our passage says, some people craving money have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. Be content with what you have. And if God chooses to give you more, then thank him for it. And keep him at the forefront of your energy and attention, because it's not all about the Benjamins. Keep him first. So here's my action step for you this week is I want you to make a list of 20 ways that God has blessed you financially. Even if you don't feel like things are going well financially for you. I am sure you could make a list of 20 things. Even if you are the poorest of the poor and you qualify for all 4 of those giant welfare benefits, right? You probably have 20 things at least that you could thank God that he has blessed you with. So I want you to write down 20 things, and then I want you to pick one of those things and use that one blessing in order to bless other people. That's my action step this week. So I have one more question for you as the band comes up to do a closing song here. And the question is, what does loving money look like in practical terms? What does it look like in our society when people love money? I'm not talking about like Bill Gates people. I'm not talking about people like that. I'm talking about normal people. What does loving money look like in practical terms? So share your thoughts with the people around you, and then we're going to close with a song.